Where do we go next? Is it down there?
You said yes.
He said, yeah. Is that yes?
Yeah.
This video is dedicated to Liz's dog, Paddy. He was a great dog, very gentle and loving, and is sorely missed by us all. You'll be seeing Paddy in part of this video. This concertina style sketchbook took 2 years to make. It documents a walk that took 21 days to do and covered 120 miles. And it's full of sketches I did along the way. In fact, it's so long now that I haven't got a measuring tape long enough to measure it. And the only place I could fully extend this sketchbook was this entranceway in my house. While I've been making this journal and adding onto it for each section of the walk, I've never fully extended the whole thing. And quite honestly, this really surprised me how long it actually became. But it is almost 2 years of sketching and 21 days of walking. The only way to measure it was to extend this measuring tape, see where it ended, so it's 5 metres to here, and then measure it from the other end. So it's 500 centimetres plus 200 centimetres, which is 7 metres. I can't believe it. But what else can we say about this journal? This sketchbook weighs 1 kilo, and that's over 2 pounds. It's nearly 10 centimetres thick, which is about 4 inches. But first, why did I make a sketchbook like this? And why has it become so big? Let's go back to the beginning. When I began creating this sketchbook, it looked like this. So pretty, and I had romantic ideas about what it would look like. But then, after 2 years, it looks like this. So what happened in those 2 years? Let me explain. Hi, it's Diane and welcome to another video. Over the last 2 years, I've been doing a walk called the Nene Way. With my friend Liz, we've walked the length of the river from its source out to the sea. And for each section of the walk that was completed, I created the next section in this concertina sketchbook. I would just stick another sheet of paper on and fold it. What could go wrong? But today we're not going to judge. Today we're just going to take a look at the end result of a very imperfect sketchbook. Let's start at the beginning of the sketchbook and the beginning of the walk. And the first stage of the walk was from Badby to Weedon. On the way to Weedon, we went through a beautiful village called Newnham. And in this video, I'm going to show parts of the walk and also my sketchbook. Hello. Hello, you three. Hello. I use this technique a lot in my sketchbooks, and that is to use a black ink pen and then create tone with a water brush. It's a really quick way of creating a sketch, especially if you don't have many art materials with you. I wanted to experiment in my sketchbook, so I used collage to create a scene of Newnham. The style is very different from how I usually draw, but it was good to try out my little experiment. Before we got to Weedon, we went through another pretty village called Everden. I used an ink pen to add some of the things we'd seen on the way, and some of those things were a bit more unexpected. The style of my drawings changed over time, but on day 2 of the walk I was still trying to do the collage technique, and this is the Royal Ordnance Depot at Weedon Beck, which was the start of day 2. In the early 1800s, the British Army needed a safe place to keep muskets, cannon and gunpowder. The small village of Weedon was chosen for this job, and work began on the Royal Ordnance Depot in 1804. I used the same collage technique to create this scene and added notes with my ink pen. The other feature of this village is the fact that it's near the Grand Union Canal. Yeah, this is the canal up. It's actually above the village. Oh, look at the lovely canal boats. The canal is actually quite a lively place, and there's also a train line nearby. There's lots of dog walkers, and it did feel like a very relaxed place to spend some time. You will see as we go through this sketchbook that I actually abandoned this technique because it was taking me too long, and I wanted to record all the walks. But I enjoyed experimenting with the tissue and the paper, and that's what I think sketchbooks are for, to try out different techniques. The paper that I'm adding is mostly tissue paper, but also other papers left over from other projects. I then add gouache paint on top to add some detail. The next destination along this walk is the pretty village of Flor. We spent some time there eating our lunch, and I did this drawing of the church. But this is where things started to go downhill, and this last part of the walk was not so enjoyable. I'm actually scared of cows, and we had to go through a few fields full of them. But luckily, they seemed quite relaxed and ended up being in my sketchbook. And this is a digital drawing that I printed out and stuck into my sketchbook. The next destination was Nether Hayford.
Looks like we're coming out into the village.
Nether Hayford has the original buildings of an old watermill, and it looks like they've been converted into a golf club. I created this in a different sketchbook, cut it out and added it to my concertina sketchbook. It's created with marker pens. I was really enjoying using different media in this sketchbook. To create the idea of a continuous walk, I added dotted lines and then the names of the villages that we went through. The Nenway goes round the back of the mill and into the village itself. When we left the village of Nether Hayford, we entered into a very different landscape. This part of the walk was overgrown and full of weeds. In my sketchbook, I needed to find a way of showing this very busy road. This motorway was built in the 1960s, and originally this would have been a footpath through fields. Luckily, there was a tunnel underneath this road, and I showed it in my sketchbook using a grey piece of paper. It really did cut the walk in half. Pretty villages became a very overgrown, desolate landscape. The footpath has been there a long time before the M1 was built, but now I'm afraid it's in a very sorry state. And as we made our way to Kislingbury, the signs and the footpath itself was not very well maintained, and I doubt many people walk on it now. And now begins the next part of the walk, which is from Kislingbury to Northampton. We began the walk by sketching the mill. The mill was owned by a brother and sister with the surname of Metters. The family owned it for about 150 years, but there was no one to pass it down to. The building in the middle was where the water wheel was housed and the water entered under the bridge. The building to the right was where the family lived. And now it looks as if it's been converted into flats. When I got home, I added the drawing to my sketchbook. Because I didn't completely like the drawing, I added in a different background. I like to include things we see along the way, even if those things seem really trivial. As we were walking along, we saw some jam for sale on a table with an honesty box. And of course I had to buy a jar. It tasted amazing, by the way, and I've added it as an enjoyable memory to my sketchbook. As well as the unexpected things along the way, I also wanted to add plants and flowers to my journal. As we meandered along, we discussed what we saw in the fields and by the side of the path. Here's another technique that I tried. I stamped out some shapes of flowers and added them on as a collage and went around the whole thing with watercolour. There is a landmark in Northampton that you can see for miles, and that's the National Lift Tower, and here you can see it in the distance. As we approached Northampton, I wanted to add its features to my sketchbook. This part of the walk ended at the Carlsberg Brewery, and again I experimented with the format of the sketchbook by making the line of the walk white against a dark background and trying to make it look more like a map. This is the Carlsberg Brewery that occupies a site in the centre of Northampton near the river. I added it to the top of the page using an ink pen and tried to blend it in with the map-like drawing I did underneath. As we continued our walk, we noticed this really interesting old building, and it looked like a former warehouse. I was still doing my collage technique at this point of the sketchbook. For this building, I drew the outline using an ink pen, and with a water brush I added tone by blurring the ink, which wasn't completely waterproof. Most of the drawings on this page were completed afterwards using a photograph, but I did want to include some drawings that were done on location. And for the drawing showing the centre of Northampton, we actually sat in a cafe and drew what we see out of the window. When I draw on location, I take a very small kit with me, and that includes an ink pen and a water brush. And within about 5 or 10 minutes, I've got a quick sketch. And then I'll stick it into my sketchbook when I get home. Day 4 of this walk ended at Billing. This is a home for humans as well as birds, such as these ducks and geese, as well as this heron that we saw across one of the bridges. I created these geese as a digital drawing, printed it out and stuck it into my sketchbook. I like to add a bit of humour to my sketchbook, and sometimes I'll create a little cartoon. You will notice I've added a hat and glasses, and that's to show how hot it was that day.
Yeah.
Leaving the geese behind, the next subject in my sketchbook is this abandoned mill. And this was a pub until 2020, until it closed. We couldn't go in the building, but I found a picture of the wheel which I believe is still inside. Here's my drawing of it. The wheel is in the middle building behind the black door. After my quick exploration around the building, I decided to do some really quick sketches. This is something I do when I'm trying to work out a composition. I stood in different places and made a very quick 1-minute sketch. These are what I call thumbnail sketches. They're small and really quick, less than a minute to draw, and try not to think about it too much. And they're not meant to be finished drawings. I find this really useful to add to my sketchbook. We ended up staying here for about half an hour before continuing on our walk. We find it's better to do the sketches at the beginning of the walk before you feel too tired. We also like to sit and have a chat about what we've just seen.
This is a good spot actually to draw from. Yeah, I'm just hoping that someone can buy this mill and restore it. But I think it would be quite expensive to do.
I did another quick sketch from this location using my ink pen, and it was lovely just sitting there listening to the water race through the mill and seeing the swans and birds. Apart from buildings and animals that I saw along the way, I also wanted to add some of the gates that we walked through. Our next stop was a village called Cookner. And this gate was particularly appealing because it was hidden away.
Oh, here it is. Oh, look at that.
That's a tunnel.
I would never have thought that was the way.
Look at that. Magic.
I did this little drawing with fine liners and marker pens. As we left the lovely village of Cookner, we came upon what looked like a Martian landscape. There was work going on where the original footpath would have been. I drew a Martian in a spaceship just to reflect how I felt about walking through it. As we neared the end of our walk, there was another challenge, and that was this incredibly high bridge. And this bridge was not great if you have a fear of heights. That definitely had to go in the sketchbook. I was really relieved to finally get off that bridge, and this was the final leg of the walk, which took us into the village of Earls Barton. I added a portrait of us both. Where's the bus stop? The walk from Earls Barton to Wellingborough ended up being one of my favourites. This is the All Saints Parish Church, and apparently it's got a really old Saxon tower. I believe the church dates from the 10th century. We left Earls Barton and it was a beautiful day, and we ended up at this lovely mill called Hardwater Crossing. We thought this would be ideal to do a sketch. We really enjoyed sitting by the river and taking our time drawing in the mill. This is one of my favourite watercolour sets. I take it with me when I go out sketching, and as you can see it's very compact. All the colours are in the middle, and then there's some mixing palettes that fold out. There's also a small bottle to store water. Reluctantly, we left this location after we'd finished our paintings and made our way to the village of Doddington. And this is where I tried to find some butterflies to sketch. I'm going to try and do some butterfly stalking now. They've gone. There's quite a few round here.
There's another one. There's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
They're all round, they're usually round gateways. We sat in the churchyard at Doddington and had our lunch, and I thought this would be a great sketch. You can see the pen I'm using is a brush pen, and I find these a really great way to do a quick drawing. These pens are also activated by water, so you can do a wash that looks a bit like a watercolour. Wellingborough was the start of our next walk, and we wanted to do a circular walk to Irchester and back. Whitworth's Mill was constructed in 1886. I'd done a previous drawing of this mill in another sketchbook. I copied it, cut it out and added it to my journal. We decided to do this walk to bring Paddy with us. Paddy is Liz's dog, and we thought it would be an ideal walk for him to do.
Where do we go next? Is it down there?
He said yes.
He said, yeah. Is that yes?
Little did we know that Paddy was going to lead the way in this part of the walk. This is where you leave the park to go across to Irchester. You go up the steps near this wooden sculpture.
I don't know. What are you, a Roman?
He definitely needed to go in the sketchbook. I've been to this field before and done a drawing, so again I copied it, cut it out and added that to my journal. I wanted to continue with the collage elements, so I added some tissue to represent the river. And I did the final drawing for this part of the walk at Irchester. I did a very quick sketch of the church. Again, I'm using an ink pen and a water brush to create the tone. This was literally a 5-minute sketch, and I added it to the journal when I got home. Our next walk is from Wellingborough to Rushden. The walk continues along the river and it goes past Chester House. Along this part of the river you can see cormorants, and they like to sit up in trees or on logs or on poles with their wings outstretched. And the shape that they make with their wings is very distinctive and a great way of identifying them. So of course I had to put one in my sketchbook. And this one has caught a fish. I don't always directly draw into the sketchbook. I like to cut out drawings and collage them together. As we left Wellingborough and walked along the river, on the right you can see Chester House. Chester House dates back to Roman times. You can visit it if you go over the bridges, or you can continue your walk under what is known as the 14 Arches. You can see in the distance another smaller bridge, and if you go across that you can enter Chester House. I've done a previous drawing of this scene and I'm going to add it to my sketchbook.
2 trains.
A bit further along from Chester House is this railway bridge. I love the architecture of all the arches. I created a sketch using a pencil and I added that to my sketchbook underneath my picture of Chester House. The walk continues along the river until you reach Ditchford Bridge. This is the site of an old watermill, and it's been extended and built on over the years, so I'm not sure if the original buildings are still there. But I've done an artist's impression of what it may have looked like years ago, and I'm going to show it here. I'm not sure exactly where the mill would have been, whether it would be on this site or not, but it seemed to fit in that location. The walk and the river continues through Rushden Lakes and takes you through a nature reserve called Stanwick Lakes. Here you will see many birds, flowers and wildlife. This area is managed by the Wildlife Trust, and it's a great place to go bird watching, and you'll see birds such as this heron. Or you would be able to if I had a better camera. We saw lots of herons, so he needs to go in my sketchbook.
Yeah, that is quite a tall plant.
Yeah.
I took photos of wildflowers we saw along the way to identify them when I got home. Leaving the nature reserve, we entered the village of Little Addington and had our lunch in the churchyard before moving on to Ringstead.
So this is the watermill at Ringstead.
The watermill is now a pub and restaurant. Using the marker pens, I made a drawing. And leaving this village, this is where I thought I'd do some butterfly spotting. And I'd never seen one of these before. It's called a comma. I like to rip the edges of some of the images to give it a more interesting look, instead of everything being in a box. And nothing is to scale, of course. Our walk then continues from Woodford to Thrapston.
I don't know if it's picking it up on the camera, but there's loads of birds circling round that bit of wood. There's a huge kite, as in kite, the bird, hovering over us.
As I mentioned before, sometimes I like to draw a cartoon and add it to my sketchbook. And sometimes I have an idea for that as I'm walking along.
Right, I'm going to do an illustration. I'm going to be a mole, sort of blindly, walking around trying to find the right way. And Liz is the badger, and this microphone is a mouse. So I've made a note of it now, so I'm going to do it in my sketchbook when I get back.
I have it beside my sleeves. I want
It's
like a check shirt with the sleeves on.
okay, check shirt with sleeves on it. It's going to sounds very wind in the willows-ish.
One of my favourite childhood books is Wind in the Willows, so I'm glad I managed to do this little drawing. The walk continues to Islip, and here I faced my greatest fear, a herd of cows that potentially could charge us. Fortunately, that didn't happen. Luckily, we made it past the cows that didn't seem too concerned, but it wasn't that easy getting through the bridge onto the path without getting stuck with our bags. As well as large animals, we also came across the opposite extreme.
They're like, what are they called, boatmen or something?
Yeah, they're called boatmen. You can just see the ripples, the indentation, but I can't see what it is.
And yes, this was the first insect to enter the sketchbook. I was enjoying using the brush pens, so I continued to use them for this part of the sketchbook.
That must be the old mill there.
Yeah, you can hear it turning round.
Yeah, I can hear the water coming out. It's up here.
Oh, you can get
Yeah, I'll get a photo of it from here.
oh my goodness.
Oh, there you go.
Look at that.
Look at how the water's going down there.
I'll get some pictures of
That is a nice scene, actually.
There were many idyllic scenes for this part of the walk, but also my favourite, which is old walls and gateways.
There's ivy growing all over.
Yeah, I really like gates and old walls. I might do a drawing of that.
I drew the outline first with a fine liner pen, which is waterproof, As you can see with these brush pens, you can use the water brush with them to create a watercolour effect. This part of the walk provided many interesting gateways and even ones that weren't used anymore.
Look at this gateway. It looks like it would have been an old manor house or something.
The last part of the walk, and for 2024, brought us to the old manor at Barnwell. It has a 13th century castle in its grounds. You can see more of the castle from this angle, but later on in our walk we did see the castle in the distance again. I created this painting when I got home, and I used watercolours and gouache paints, as well as a brush pen. Just a bit further along we sat and drew a really nice old bridge. Having a camera malfunction. It is, but it looks nice.
Okay, so see this? It is a Tipp-Ex pen. And I thought I could use this to add in highlights when I'm out sketching. It does seem to work. I've not done this before. And you can just, instead of having all your paints and everything, you can just do that.
We continued our walk around the back of the village and saw some nice views from there.
You could do a sketch from there. That would be quite nice.
For this sketch I used a fine liner pen to do the outline, watercolours and watercolour pencils. And here we are in the following year at Ashton Mill. Ashton Mill used the River Nen to deliver DC hydroelectricity to Ashton Well 2 miles away and water to Ashton. The mill closed in the 1950s when the Nen was dredged. You can see the old style signage around the front. The walk takes us from Ashton Mill through Ashton Village to Warmington. And the next stop in our walk brought another surprise.
You must be used to people feeding you, otherwise you wouldn't get this close. Is that right? I can't believe they've got peacocks here. Look at you. Wow. Amazing. I don't think she's interested though, do you? She doesn't look that impressed.
He looks a bit younger than he does.
Oh. Yes, very pretty, I know. Don't worry.
Oh, no.
As I completed each section of this sketchbook, I changed the background. And the paper I'm painting on here is craft paper. It gives a mid-tone and enables highlights to stand out. You can see this on the drawing I did of the pub, where I used a white gel pen and a black fine liner pen. Miriam Rothschild renamed the pub the Checkered Skipper after the butterfly that was prolific in her father's time but disappeared in the 1970s. And if you think peacocks, fleas and butterflies isn't enough about this village, then there's another surprising fact for you. In October 1964, the Ashton Conker Club Knockout Championship was born, and World Conker Championships were hosted on Ashton Green until 2010. If you're not sure what conkers are, they're taken from the horse chestnut tree and threaded onto a string. Each opponent tries to knock the other conker by flicking it at the end of the string until one of the conkers is destroyed. I completed the conker drawing using a fine liner pen and watercolours. The next stretch of the walk took us from Warmington to Yarwell and a ride on a vintage train. I know this looks just like a hill, but it's actually an important site. It's where Mary Queen of Scots was held prisoner and she was executed here at Fotheringay. You can still visit the site, but there's nothing left of the original castle. While we were doing the walks around the Peterborough area, we stayed at Lynch Lodge, which is in Alwalton. But when I got back to the lodge, while it was still fresh in my memory, I created some drawings and did this artist impression of what the castle would have looked like. I based the drawing on what was shown on the notice board, and I also added my own cartoon version of Mary Queen of Scots. It's difficult to know what she actually looked like. Descriptions and portraits of her vary, but this is my cartoon version. I used a black brush pen to create this dotted line, and that was meant to indicate the direction of the walk and the places that we visited. And the last place we visited was Yarwell Junction Station, part of the Nen Valley Railway. The station is very small and I made a sketch of it to go in my journal. The train we ended up getting was a diesel train, but you can get steam trains on this railway. For this section of the walk we stayed at Lynch Lodge, and of course that had to be a drawing in my sketchbook. Lynch Lodge.
Keep looking round down there.
The walks along this part of the river are full of birds and wildlife, including this heron and these two swans.
They are definitely doing some kind of mating dance. You're dancing, you asking, I'm dancing.
I got love, love. I got love.
We also found remnants from the past, including this windmill. This is Castor Mill and little is known about it. I think it first began operation in the 1800s. There would have been a cap to this building where the sails would have been attached to it. I believe it operated as a corn mill, and here is my very rough drawing of what it may have looked like. There were so many flowers, plants and birds to record in my sketchbook that I was spoilt for choice. And some of them I'd never seen before.
I think these plants in front of us are flags. I think they're called flags. I have never actually seen any before. Can you hear the cuckoo?
I've never seen a cuckoo before, I've only ever heard them, but apparently they have stripy black and white feathers on their chest, as well as grey feathers at the top.
There is a cormorant, which you won't be able to see on here, right at the top of that tree over there.
And, as always on these walks, there was an unexpected surprise.
I can't believe that. I'm going to try and zoom in so I can see it. They're on the river bank. I've tried to zoom in so you can see it. Look, all have gone into the water.
Oh, I've missed them.
It's unusual to see seals this far down the river, but it does show that we're getting nearer towards the coast.
I won't be able to.
During my stay at Lynch Lodge, I managed to do quite a few drawings, and that includes ones of Peterborough and the plants and flowers that we saw along the way. Our walk ended at Peterborough, and I decided to create another drawing of a very famous queen who is buried at Peterborough Cathedral. Catherine of Aragon was married to Henry VIII. After Henry divorced Catherine, she was sent away and finally came to Kimbolton Manor. There she lived under house arrest for nearly 2 years until her death in 1536. The pomegranate is one of the symbols associated with Catherine, and people still bring this fruit as an offering for her. It's difficult to know what people look like at this time because the portraits of them vary. I created this portrait of her based on the cross-stitch portrait that you can see at Peterborough Cathedral. And I couldn't resist using my Posca pen to add some gold. You'll notice that for this part of the walk I decided to use black paper. And as a background, I felt it really made my sketches stand out. As we left Peterborough, there were more signs of the Victorian industrial past, including this abandoned mill. And it dates from 1848. This sketch is how it would have looked around the other side of the building when it was in operation. On leaving the outskirts of Peterborough, the landscape changes dramatically and becomes very flat. This area is known as the Fenlands and is reclaimed land. The walk took us past Flag Fen. Flag Fen is an archaeology park. It sits within a Bronze Age landscape. The sketch I've done here is of the roundhouse. Unfortunately, this roundhouse has been destroyed by fire. Flag Fen is raising funds to replace it. The walk took us to Whittlesea and we found this windmill in the middle of a housing estate. I can't talk about Whittlesea without mentioning the Whittlesea Straw Bear. Every year in January, the Whittlesea Straw Bear appears in the town and parades through the streets. Our walk continues along the fens to a place called Guyherne, but I need to tell you a story first.
I've been reading this story online about the Tiddy Mun. I'm not sure if it's this area or Lincolnshire, but there is a legend of a very small man that looks like a gnome that lived in this area. He's supposed to be some kind of nature god, and before the land was reclaimed and the river was recut, the people that lived in these areas would appease this Tiddy Mun by saying verses and leaving offerings because they very much depended on nature for their farming methods. But if I can find a picture or draw a picture, I shall draw a picture of Tiddy Mun and he'll be right here.
The name Tiddy in the local dialect means little and Mun is man. Our journey became a bit more difficult at this point, but it was compensated by spotting some butterflies and wildlife. The path was difficult to walk through, but we did see lots of butterflies like this red admiral. And there was something else that I found along this walk which I wasn't able to capture on my camera because it happened so quickly. But I put a foot down onto the ground and I heard a little squeak, and this very tiny baby bird ran across the path in front of me and went under some vegetation. I looked it up later on and found that it was a baby pheasant. I've made a sketch so you could see what it looked like. I've done lots of walks in the English countryside. I've never done this type of walk where you more or less go in a straight line for 8 miles. It was lovely to see some of the wildlife and it is a very open landscape, but I was glad to see Guyherne, which was the next village. As we came into the village, the sound of the traffic was quite jarring. We're nearing the end of our walk now, but first of all we need to make our way to Wisbeach. Okay, so we've gone past the pumping station, which I talked to the owner for a bit, and he said it goes back quite a long way and it was used to pump out the water, but closed in the 60s, and it's his home now. They've moved the pumping station a bit further down where we just walked past. I took a small sketchbook with me for this part of the walk, and I ripped the pages out and inserted them into my journal when I got home. It's much easier to carry a small sketchbook rather than the whole journal. There were 2 sketches that I did for Wisbeach. One was Peckover House and one was this interesting warehouse by the side of the river. From Wisbeach we make our way to Sutton Bridge, and I continued using my small sketchbook to create the next drawings, and one of those were these lovely sheep that I saw by the side of the path. I ended up doing some drawings of these sheep because their faces had such character. Sutton Bridge is named after this swing bridge that allows ships to enter the river and sail down to Wisbeach. This is the final section of the walk and the final section of my journal, and we did some sketches outside to celebrate. The walk ends at the Wash, at the Sir Peter Scott's Lighthouse. And this is where we sat and spent some time enjoying the day and reflecting back on our walk. The young Peter Scott came here looking for seclusion. Very soon after making the lighthouse his home, he decided to become a painter of wildlife, and not only achieved outstanding success as an artist, but during his 6 years here, he wrote and illustrated his first 2 books, Morning Flight and Dawn Chorus. The ideas laid down here led after the war to him being a prime mover to establishing the World Wildlife Fund, the first global conservation organisation ever, and it continues today. As we did to mark the end of our walk, I can just imagine Sir Peter Scott sitting here and making drawings in his sketchbook. And it was a really lovely way to end the walk. This is the end of the walk and the sketchbook, but I'm sure there's many more adventures to come.